This is your coffee break. Hey friends, I'm back again this week and I have a super exciting guest for you. Today I have on the show Joanna Penn of thecreativepenn.com. She's an award-nominated New York Times and USA bestselling author of thrillers under the pen name J.F. Penn. She also writes inspirational nonfiction for authors and is an award-winning creative entrepreneur and international professional speaker. Her site, thecreativepenn.com, is regularly voted one of the top 10 sites for websites and self-publishers. Oh my gosh, welcome to the show, Joanna. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Well, gosh, not as excited as I am to talk to you. I was telling Joanna when we first connected here over Skype that I'm such a huge admirer of her show. So she also has a creative writing podcast called The Creative Penn, and I just kind of want to hear, you have so much going on. You have books, you have this podcast, you do speaking. How do you make all of these things work together? Tell us how being a creative entrepreneur works.
Oh, it's such a great question. And it's funny because we're talking on a Monday and this morning, I just went for a really big hike because I've been struggling with this myself. Just so people know, I started writing in 2006. So as we talk, that's 11 years ago, writing for publication. And so, where I am now with the Creative Penn as a business and a website and the podcast, and I've got 25 books now under several different pen names, but I didn't actually construct this back in 2006. So it's funny how you say yes to opportunity, and as a creative, it's always about the books. So I've always got books on the go, and then suddenly sort of all the things you wanted have happened. And that's kind of where I am now, which is really interesting. And my first sort of point for people would be, if you make a 10-year plan, and then it happens, what do you want your life to look like? And so I was saying to my husband the other day, okay, so do I make another 10-year plan? Because this has worked over 10 years and you think it's taking such a long time for it to happen, and then it happens. And now it's okay, so what do I want to do now? And so I'm at the point now where I'm okay, so what does it come back to? What are the unique things that I can do? For example, when I started my podcast in 2009 and my website, self-publishing was, not trendy. It was the last resort. Whereas now self-publishing is everywhere. My blog was one of the very first blogs to talk about self-publishing, and now there are lots of them. So I'm okay, do I have to talk about it anymore? I mean, I probably don't. So I'm so the things I focus on, and I guess where I'm coming back to and what you're doing is the craft. So the books I write as Joanna Penn and J.F. Penn, my fiction name, these are things that only I can do. And my podcast, because, it's been going a long time. And when you speak like you, you have a unique voice and people follow you. So my books and my podcast are kind of what I'm coming back to. And I'm starting to try and say no to lots of other things. So, yeah, it is difficult to manage. Everyone struggles with that.
Oh my gosh, yes. One of the things that you mentioned just now was saying no. It's so hard when every opportunity seems so amazing and you can't see past the possibility. Can you tell us how you say no?
Well, it's funny because I was listening to a bit of one of your shows about traveling and writing,
yes.
Which you did recently. And it's hilarious because I love traveling too. And I travel a lot. In fact, next week I'm off to San Francisco and then Oregon. And I've been all over the place this year. And as you said in your previous show, it's very tiring. You think you want to travel. You're yay, I'm so excited. And then you're exhausted. And then I got sick on my last trip to Italy. I got really sick and it kind of just wiped me out. And then I remembered that this time last year, I went to Oregon and then Israel and I got really sick. Mm-hmm. And I was okay, I need to stop this, repeating the same patterns. So I'm terrible at saying no. So just to admit that, but it's something that I have to sort out. And I was on my big hike earlier. I was listening to Derek Sivers.
Yes.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And he's got this thing, which is it's got to be a hell yeah or a no. And I've got that on my blooming wall and I still struggle with it. It's like, okay, if it's not yes, I must do this, then it should be a no. And it's different when it's a podcast because, of course, we're talking, we're not in the same country, neither of us have traveled, it's fine. But if you have to go and speak at a conference, say you're doing an hour's talk at a conference on the other side of the world, which, I've agreed to even 2 years ahead of time. It's like, okay, that's a lot of work. So why am I doing it? And it's funny because at the beginning you say yes to everything because nobody knows who you are. And then later on, you kind of have to say no, otherwise you're just on someone else's agenda all the time.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, it's our creative work is our agenda. So, I've just deleted Facebook off my phone because that's something else. It's fear of missing out. It's ego, like really coming to grips with, did I say yes to speak at that conference because of ego? Because it's not the money anymore. I reach people through my podcast and my books. Why do I need to do this? So I guess I have no answers except that going back to Derek Sivers is that hell yeah or no. And what do you want? We only have a limited amount of time. So have you made your art today? Have you, are you doing something that will end up with a creative legacy? Or are you just doing things that will disappear? Again, these are things that all creators seem to struggle with.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I'm so interested, and this is something I haven't talked about on my show before. Tell us a little bit more what you mean about creative legacy.
Well, I guess, so the exciting thing about being a writer is that we don't create a book. We have intellectual property assets that can make us money while we're alive and 70 years after we die, according to the laws of copyright in the US and the UK, for example. So that means that potentially if we structure what we do in the right way, we can help provide for our families, for other causes. For example, one of my heroes is Beatrix Potter, who people might remember children's books. But she was, a single lady who her legacy was to gift the Lake District in Britain, which is this huge national park, to the British people. She basically bought up this area of natural beauty with her book royalties and gave it to the British public. And now it's one of the most amazing places in Britain. So that inspires me to think, okay, so in my lifetime, I want to entertain, educate, inspire people with my body of work, which is the things that I can do that no one else can do. And then after I'm dead, because let's face it, we're all going to die, then I would love either, to help my family and or leave a bigger legacy that would potentially help more people. If we look at some of the wealthiest people in the world right now, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, giving 90% of their money to causes to try and make the world a better place. So I think to me, creative legacy is, on the one hand, it is that creativity, like the things that you can write because it's you. And also on the financial side, I really believe that creating wealth is as creative as writing a book or a poem or whatever, and that you can do a lot of good with that. So now I'm in the fortunate position now to be in a financially comfortable position with my income from my creative business. So now I'm starting to think about, well, how far can I take that? What can I do that will help other people in a bigger way? So it's very exciting. And I think too many creatives think, oh, poor, I'm a poor author in a garret, you just can't make any money as a writer and all this. And actually, it is pretty amazing what you can do with an intellectual property asset.
I love that. It's something that we writers don't think enough about or talk enough about. We tend to dive into art for art's sake and not really think about our impact on the world outside of what our ideas are doing. So I absolutely love that you said that. I also want to ask, so you've created this amazing sort of writing platform, this business. If someone out there is maybe a writer, or maybe they haven't jumped out into the professional side of writing yet, do you have any advice for a first step that they can take?
Well, I think the first step is to really decide do you want to be a professional writer? And, the word amateur is often used in a negative way, but the word amateur actually means people who love what they do and they do it for the love of it. So to be an amateur writer, you can write and publish your books, like self-publish, books for fun and for a creative project, for the love of it as an amateur. And that's awesome, absolutely brilliant. I helped my 9-year-old niece self-publish. I helped my dad self-publish their books for fun. It was never a creative project. They were never going to be professional. But for me, when I decided this, I was like, okay, I actually want to give up my day job and become a writer. So I know you juggle a lot of different things as well. So you have to make that decision. Yes, I am going to make a living with my writing. And then you have to start thinking about the multiple streams of income. So once you've made that decision, you have to look at the reality of how people make money as writers. So, for example, I make my living from my writing, but some of that writing is on a blog. Some of that writing is in a book. I count my speaking as part of my writing because I get speaking gigs because I'm a writer, which many authors will also teach. You're a speaker. Many literary fiction prize winners teach creative writing at universities. Speaking and teaching is a huge part of a writer's business often. Freelance writing or ghostwriting, I believe you do some of that. I mean, that is work for hire. So, mostly it's work for hire. So it's not building an asset. It's income generating work like speaking. You do it once, you get paid once, that's it. And then as writers, we also have to think about building those assets, which is, writing the book, not licensing it for the life of copyright, because that will definitely screw you over. But, looking at that as an asset that's going to bring you income for long term. So really just considering that the writing life can be a business, because if you want it to pay your bills, you have to think about the money. So just sort of taking it back, the first step, I think, is really A, to decide that you're going to do this, and then B, start a separate bank account. Because just that first step of starting a second bank account, and you don't have to set up a company or incorporate or anything like that. You just have to track your income and expenses while you do it as a side hustle, because, we all have to do that. I didn't give up my job till September 2011. So I did 5 years as a side hustle, and then gave up my job. So, having a separate bank account will actually start to help you see where the money comes in and where the money goes out. And then you can look at sort of scaling up from there.
That is invaluable. Thank you for sharing that. That is so invaluable. And I speak with writers a lot of the time who say, hey, I want to write full time. I'm going to quit my job tomorrow and just go for it. And I always say, wait, you need to kind of overlay both at the same time. You need to develop, like you said, the side hustle while you are working full time, just to make sure that you're going to be okay. And I love the idea of starting a bank account right away. I think it's free generally, and it's an easy way to really sort of commit to it.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And I think if people quit their job, before they've even written a book as well, because, that first book can often take a long time. Yes. And then the most disappointed author is usually the one whose book has just come out. And for about half an hour, they're like, yay, amazing, my book's in the world. And then they're like, oh, I haven't made $1 million and I can't retire. Yes. Because the reality is, like, the average book sells less than 5,000 copies.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're living, we it's a very crowded environment. We know this. But, if you love writing books, it's awesome, because the number of books you have really compounds your income. So, I make good money off book sales, but I have 26 books at this point, and that's just individual books. That's not counting box sets and the ways that you can use those books together, bundles and things like that, to make more products and more saleable products. So just on this, if people are interested, I do have a book called How to Make a Living with Your Writing, which might help people who want more detail in that.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure that I link to that book in the show notes for today's episode. I kind of want to switch gears just a little bit and ask you about your fiction writing, about your creative writing. So you publish under a pen name and you write thrillers. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
Yeah, sure. So I did NaNoWriMo in 2009, National Novel Writing Month. I think you do that too.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and it's coming up as we speak. Don't know when this will go out, but November every year. And basically, I was like, before that, a few months before that, I'd done a podcast interview, and the guy I was interviewing said, "I think you have a block about fiction writing," and I was like, "No, I don't. I'm fine. I don't want to write a novel." And he was like, "No, you think about it." And I went to Oxford University, and my mum was also an English teacher. So I had this very literary kind of background, and Britain is terribly snobby, much more snobby than America. So I was like, the only novel worth writing is like a prize-winning novel, literary novel, and that's all I could consider writing. And then Dan Brown had his Da Vinci Code, and my degree is in theology, and I was like, you know what, I could write a religious thriller like Dan Brown. That would be awesome. And I was actually reading a lot of thrillers. I love thrillers, and I was miserable in my job, and I would read thrillers at lunchtime, and I was like, okay, well, how about I just write something fun that involves explosions and death and a secret agency and a kick-ass woman, and it'll be really fun. And so that's what I started writing in November 2009, and then I only wrote 20,000 words, so you're meant to write 50, but hey, if you I still got enough out of it, and I spent the following year writing, and then I published what is now Stone of Fire in 2011, and then that series, the Arcane series, action adventure thrillers, now has 9 books. Cool. And then I've done a trilogy of mystery, sort of supernatural mystery crime with a British detective set in London. I've done a couple of dark fantasy novels, some co-written, some short stories. So yeah, I love writing fiction. It's some days I think I would give up everything else, and then I think I'd just go nuts because I'm just in my own head all the time. But yeah, I think my tip with fiction, I think, is that we all hear this, and I remember hearing this, is you will find your voice, but only by writing a number of books. Like, I don't think people find their voice on book 1 or 2. Like, I think I found my voice on book 5, which in my book Desecration by J.F. Penn. That book is the first book where I was like, that's me. That is me. And before that, it was like, yeah, kind of me, but still a little bit censored. So, and then book 5 was me.
So it sounds like you had a breakthrough. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to really discover your voice and how you knew and what that meant?
Well, I think, I'd written, it was my 5th book, and I'd written enough that I knew how to write a novel. So when you're writing those first couple of books, you're still understanding that writing fiction has a structure, like it has a story structure, that, dialogue, for example, is something that you have to get used to writing. Just things, there are things in fiction that are, you as a non-fiction writer, you would never do. So I think by book 5, you're kind of like, okay, I understand how to do that. I also had relaxed a lot more. I felt that I'd also kind of cleared a lot. If you think about your creativity as a sort of pipeline, I'd cleared a lot of stuff out the way that had sat there for years. So, and the real true me was sort of starting to come out, and I was feeling a lot more confident about there being an audience out there like me. Like, I thought I was weird. Like, for example, I like graveyards. I always use this example. I like going to graveyards. I'm into sort of death culture. I look at Day of the Dead stuff, and when I go traveling, I go to the really dark tourist stuff, and I like ruined places, and all this stuff. And yes. I thought, I can't share that because people will think I'm weird. And then I started to write it, and the people who discovered my books were people like me. And, let's face it, Stephen King does very well doing darker work. And I was like, I'm actually a dark little soul, as my fiction writer self is a dark little soul. And somehow that wasn't acceptable because my non-fiction self, Joanna Penn, who you're interviewing, is not dark. She's jolly and positive and happy, and so I felt like I had these sort of two selves. Jungian psychology has it as the shadow side, the side that is, the darker side, and I let that out as JF Penn. So I think I just realized by book 5, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm just going to write this stuff, and if people don't go for it, then whatever. And actually, I mean, that series and that book is probably the one that I'm, I guess, not most proud of, but I feel like that was a breakthrough for me, and I do love that book. That's Desecration, if any dark little souls are listening, by JF Penn.
I have the feeling that a lot.
A little tip for people. Oh yeah. So just on that, a little tip. If people feel that you have two different audiences, so people listening, if you have two different audiences and you write two very different types of books. So I write different books as Joanna Penn than I do as JF Penn. So having two different names is really useful. I mean, clearly it's the same person because I haven't hidden it in any way. But JF Penn with initials, I have a different website, a different email list, different social media. Joanna Penn writes upbeat, books for authors, and has a completely different look and feel and brand and everything. So that's really helped me. And in terms, circling back to scheduling, I schedule JF Penn time and I schedule Joanna Penn time. So I almost can be two different people, which is fun.
That's fun and fascinating. Wow, that's so cool. I have all these questions now. So if you schedule time to be kind of one or the other, do you ever flip-flop them? Do you ever just sit down and not feel like doing it?
Well, it will depend on when I finish a draft. So I'm about to start editing Map of Shadows, which is my next JF Penn dark fantasy. So I know that for the next 2 weeks I will be working on that book. But then I'm going to America to speak, so I'll be back on Joanna Penn. So I know that I have a deadline on this, but when I was writing the first draft, I finished early. So, then I don't, push it, or if I'm late, I will push it. So it's more around my deadlines on the books. So as we speak, it's October. Oh my goodness. And I've got 3 books to get out before Christmas.
Oh my gosh.
So all of which are in different phases. And I know it's crazy because I also have a third pen name, which I didn't mention. I co-write Sweet Romance with my mum, my 70-year-old mum.
Do you really?
And it's sweet. There's no sex. There's no sex. Okay, just to be clear.
This is amazing.
Yeah, so we have our third book coming out before Christmas. So I've got one JF Penn, one Joanna Penn, and one Sweet Romance before Christmas. So I'm probably working a little too hard, but I kind of just schedule each one to make sure I'm on track with each of those projects.
Wow. So you talked a little bit about, wow, I have a lot going on. I'm very busy. How do you balance the other aspects of your life with that?
What other aspects of my life?
Is it just writing 100% of the time? Just no sleep, no food, no family?
Yeah, pretty much. No. I mean, well, it's interesting because, when I had a day job that I hated, I had work-life balance, and I would get to work at 8:30, and I would leave work at 4:30, and I would pretty much then I would do my own thing. But the life I have now, my writing is my passion, my hobbies, my job, my income, my business. My husband left his job in 2015 to join the company, and now he's in charge of investments, which is awesome. So he kind of deals with that. And he does some of my advertising and video editing and things like that. But we both work on the business. We both work from home. So my marriage is bound up in the business. My traveling is pretty much bound up in the business. So we went hiking in Italy last month. And while we were hiking, but also I visited some churches, and, everything I do now, as writers, everything we do involves our ideas and what we share. So, I'm spending a couple of days in San Francisco doing research for another book, and then I'll go and speak. So it will be both a kind of holiday and also book research. So it really, I mean, I'm not joking, like everything really is bound up now with what I love. And I don't think I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because if you love what you do, and like we love to read. So when I go to bed, I read, and,
Yep.
my reading informs my writing. So when I watch a film, stories on TV and film inform my writing. So this really is a career where everything can be bound up together. And, there are pros and cons in that, like, burning out. But like I did this morning, I went for this big hike, and, trying to integrate physical activity into writing. You can still do that with dictation. But, basically, you just have to think about, like, what do you want with your life? And if it all fits together, then, I guess there's no problem with that.
Wow, I have never thought of it that way. I just had a breakthrough talking with you right now. That's one of the things that my podcast right now is about. Like, yes, it's about work-life writing balance, and you think of them as little segments that you have to fit a little bit of each segment into each day, but they really bleed over into each other. You're really living into being a writer when you're experiencing these other things in your life. My gosh, thank you.
Oh, no, it's no problem. I mean, and that's the big difference when you do this for your living as well. Because for people listening who work a day job doing something that's completely unrelated, then their writing is like a haven and a sanctuary, or, it's something they do on top of their day job. But when your writing is your job and you love it, then you have to, then you will integrate just naturally. The only thing I'd say with you and other people who do freelance writing or ghostwriting is that, to me, is the time for money equation. And if you can make sure that more of your income is scalable, so concentrate on developing assets that will keep paying you money over time instead of just once. That is a really big tip for long-term wealth creation as a writer, is make sure your making time is on scalable income, so that you can support yourself for the long term.
You are a person who loves writing. It is in everything you do. Everything you do relates to writing. What is your absolute favorite part of writing?
I think I've got to this point now where I say I measure my life by what I create. So I like having the finished product. I like turning an idea into a finished book. And then I'm like, okay, good, that's finished. And that, I really I enjoy the whole process, to be honest. There's nothing I don't enjoy. No, I really enjoy everything. I even enjoy the marketing. I enjoy doing my accounts, for goodness sake. I enjoy everything. But I do measure my life by what I create. So ideas are never a problem once you get the hang of listening to them. The biggest problem is sort of turning those ideas into reality. So the books that I have and I can look at and say, I made this. That's where I get the satisfaction, mainly because in my day job, my old day job, I just used to feel that everything I did disappeared, that I was just earning money that, I would eat and drink and spend away. And what did I have to show for my life, except paying the bills and my taxes and stuff? And I was like, okay, I want to have something more to show for my life. So now, as I said, I measure my life by what I create in a sort of tangible form, which is awesome with books.
I love that. And I know that a lot of listeners today are going to connect with that so much. And I think they will also agree with me that I could listen to you talk about this all day. I'm so glad that you do this for a living. I'm so glad that you have your own podcast that folks can listen to. It is out, I believe, everywhere, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Also, you can visit Joanna's site at thecreativepenn.com, and I will link to that in the show notes for today's episode. You can pick up copies of her books, including How to Make a Living with Your Writing, as well as her amazing fictional thrillers. Oh my gosh, Joanna, where else can people find you? Am I missing anything?
No, I mean, that's pretty much a good start at thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N.
Yes.
And yes, my podcast, or on Twitter at thecreativepenn with a double N if you have any questions.
Amazing. You are so wonderful to talk to. I've learned so much in this short time that we've spent together. I appreciate it so much. I know my listeners appreciate it. And I cannot wait to have a little binge this afternoon on several of your episodes. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. That was great fun.